Hello, Rabbi.
Recording. Okay, you are being recorded. Duly noticed. Okay, here's the main thing. Going to talk about this group, which is Karaites. So we've had what we might call mainstream Jewish groups from different parts of the world. I haven't really spent much time on the Ethiopian Jews, but I've had little excerpts here and there of Ethiopian Jews. And although Ethiopian Jews, we followed their tradition, broke, it would seem, from the rest of the Jewish community historically over 2,000 years ago. And although they do not have the Talmud or any of our materials, they identify themselves as Jews and nothing else. And so in returning to Israel, being with the Jewish people, they're reunified. They have no problem identifying with classic rabbinic Judaism. They don't have a problem with that. We had last week about the Samaritans who broke, as we can tell, the first temple. Maybe they are descendants of the first Northern Kingdom people. There's some inputs, but way back. We've had other groups split. Most of them disappeared. The Sadducees, who were the high priests and the landlord classes, basically disappeared with the temple disappearing. The Essenes and the Dead Sea movements, off in the desert, disappeared. Well, they didn't have children, and that makes it hard to continue, right? Of Samaritans, there's 700s. The early Christians, who were still within the Jewish communities, vanished, right? Christianity and Islam separated from us completely, right? The biblical inspired faiths, but took their ways completely different. When the Roman Empire decided to put down the Jews, it wasn't so much the Bible that bothered them as what they called deuterosis. Deuterosis, the teaching of the Mishnah, the teaching of the rabbinic commentaries that they felt were leading the Jewish people to rebel against the Roman Empire and therefore have to be suppressed. So it's this distinction of the teachings of the rabbis that identifies the Jews. That's what Jews were oppressed for. In fact, in the later ages, you would see that Jews would be put down primarily because of their interpretations of the Bible. Not the Bible, but the interpretation of the Bible. So classic Judaism became we'll say, the dominant form, in which you have Torah shebichtav, the written Torah, that which is in writing, and the Torah sheba'al peh, the oral Torah. Right? That which is not necessarily oral, it's been written, but it was actually transmitted orally for many, many generations and become codified in the Mishnah, the Talmud, and all the later halachic works. That's what defines Judaism for us, right? And that's combination is what enabled Judaism to adjust throughout the ages. And so while the other movements disappeared, except Christianity and Islam, which spread out to the general world and not to an ethnic group in particular, as I said, the others disappeared or shrank. But 1,200 years ago, we had our own big split. And I'm going to use the term a Protestant Reformation, very similar to Protestant Reformation. What do I mean by that? If any of you experts on the history of Christianity, Catholic Christianity, and also the Orthodox churches, is built on the Christian scriptures, which is our side of the book and their side of the book, plus what's called apostolic tradition, the teaching of the apostles and the students of the apostles. This is really a working out of their Torah sheba'al peh, their oral Torah. So when the Pope speaks ex cathedra from Rome as an official authority, he's speaking with the weight of classic Christian traditions passed down through the generations. What we call the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther, the most prominent figure, broke with the idea of this apostolic tradition. He said, no, these traditions don't hold. He said, sola scriptura, only the written book, the Mikra, from which we get the word Karai, one who follows the book, sola scriptura. That's Martin Luther. He's not acting as a Jew, he's talking as a Christian. But we now have to talk about our Protestant moment, right? Because now we have the dominant Judaism, especially in Babylonia, which is the Judaism of the Gaonim. Those are the academic leaders who take over from the rabbis who make the Talmud, and the political leadership, the Rosh Galuta, the exilarch. Okay, so now we get the shakeup. So we have this group called the Karaim, the term in Hebrew, B'nai Mikra, Ba'alei Mikra, or Karaim, right? Children of the text, masters of the text, or the textual ones, the ones who follow the text, the Bible, right? So the scriptura, only the Bible. They originally were identified as Ananites from the founder, Anan ben David. So who are they? What are they? You don't meet many, but they're here. They're here in the United States. Also, I'll introduce you to some of them online, you'll see. They kept parts of rabbinical Judaism, either outright or with modification, but also borrowed things that may have been retained from these earlier sects, the Sadducees, the Sadducees, things from the Essenes, that is the Dead Sea sects. Then a generation earlier, talking about the rise of Islam, certainly after the rise of Islam, what's called the Isawi, followers of Abu Isa, or Yudgani, followers of Yudgan, who claimed to be the Messiah and created their own sects. They also incorporated things from Islam, right? So where are we looking at? We're looking at the period after the rise of Islam, the 7th century, 8th century, the Hijrah, the flight from Mecca, 622, I think. And then in the century thereafter, right, Islam has unified what was the ancient Persian world, North Africa, to Spain. And it upset, for a variety of reasons, upset the Jewish world, because what happens in this new world, under this new Islam, which seems to be very comfortable to us in some ways. And so there are many, many sects that begin to arise, as there had been back in the Roman period. Now, all sorts of little sects that start to oppose the authority of the rabbis and are ready to gel around some galvanizing figure. Well, who is this? When the things pop up, when there's a real problem with political succession, the Reish Galuta, the head of the Babylonian Jewish community, remember, Jews operated in all these centuries as independent governments, subject to whoever is the dominant government, but more or less running their own affairs. So the power of especially the exarch in Babylon, a very powerful political position. It was under the Caliph at that time, but very well respected, very, very highly respected by the Caliphs at that time. Things have gone downhill since, but that was in the good days. So the exarch passes away, and there are two brothers, they're relatives, who are the prime candidates. One is the older and more experienced candidate, Anan ben David. The other one, Josiah or Hassan, who was younger but may have been more acceptable as a personality. And it's the younger one who is recognized by the Gaonim, the academy heads, and the political establishment. And they went to the Caliph because now they're under the Caliph as their protector. He has to give it recognition, and he does so. So Anan is very upset. He denounces the decision, has himself declared exile because he's got some followers around him. He's got some clout also. The Caliph saw this as rebellion, and so Anan is thrown into prison. In prison, he becomes friends with, and again, this is impossible to think of today, but then the founder of the Hanafi tradition of Islam, Caliph saw him as a rebel. Hanafi tradition, very significant and serious tradition in Islam, one of the key themes of Islam, Abu Hanifa, and he teaches him how to succeed. So at the trial, Anan is brought to trial, and he throws himself at the feet of the Caliph, declares he's innocent because he's not a rebel. He's not rebelling against the political authority of the Jews. He's got a new religious group. His religion is like Islam. We're from the Bible-based. Muhammad gave us protection as Bible-based, but our doctrines are very similar to Islam. And this got him the favor of the Caliph. He got political protection. Okay, so now you're claiming a new religion. Basically, that's what he did, claimed a new religion. And now you need to have a tenets of religion. Well, what's your religion now? It goes back to the Bible. You need interpretation. So he took some of the methods from the Talmud. As I say, he may have taken documents that may have been from sources from Essenes and Sadducees. There may have been still a few stragglers from them. For example, among these sects, they did not burn any lights. One did not leave the house on Shabbat. The new moon was announced by actual observation, not relying on the calendar. And Shavuot was always on a Sunday. This is going back to the Tzaddukim, the Sadducees, not on the 50th day after the second day of Pesach. So from the Isawi and the Yudgani, he borrowed recognition of Jesus as a prophet for the Christians, Muhammad for Islam. Very good, gets himself in favor of both groups. And then he added other extra restrictions, prohibited all meat, with the exception of deer and dove, I don't know, in token of mourning for the destruction of the temple. And what he wanted to do was prove he was more devout and strict than the rabbis, the rabbinites. Well, it started a turmoil. And about a century later, this group began to gain momentum, and you found some figures who are actually well-trained, generally, philosophically, and put this on a stable foundation. So the most prominent of these is Benjamin an-Nahawendi. Some of the followers decided we can throw all the commandments. Some of the followers became too strict. An-Nahawendi pulled the middle road, and it's in his time that we have the term kara from the text, the scriptures, karaim, those who follow the text, Karaism, the English version. So we now have rabbanim, those who follow the rabbis, Karaim, those who follow the text, Karaites and Rabbinites. So he's not militantly against the Talmud. In fact, sometimes he argues against Anan's stands. He doesn't throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? He consolidates things. He uses the Hebrew language rather than Arabic for his main text, which is the way the rabbis are working. So he has his book, Sefer Dinim, so creating now, we have to have laws because Jews are a law-based system. We're just not going to follow the dictates of the rabbis. We're going to try to go back to the text and understand the text as best we can. So another century later, we have other great figures. The main one, Al-Kirkasani and Yiftach bin Ali. Kirkasani, first one to defend the dictates of common sense and knowledge in religious matters, right? Very much the influence of the rationalists among Plato and Aristotle that's affecting the Arabic world. The Karaites accepted, just as the Jews had accepted. Use of reason and investigation, proofs of reason and logical conclusions, similar to the Mutakalam and the Mutazilites among the Muslims, which was happening among Jews, right? Parallel development. Yafit ben Ali is a major source on Hebrew grammar and usage for the rabbinic Bible commentator Ibn Ezra, who doesn't like the Karaites, but he does rely on Yafit ben Ali as a source, accepts as a source. Well, this is the great growth spurs for the Karaites, big growth spurs. What do I mean by that? Widely extended among the Jews. They made followers among the Jews. Egypt, Palestine, Syria, Babylonia, Persia. And the key factors, right? The success of Islam undermining some of the stability of the main Jewish establishment. Second, returning to the Bible as the source of religion because many Jews were dissatisfied with the way the academies had maybe gone astray, had gone too far afield in their interpretations. Thirdly, also the sense that the heads of the academies, the Gaonim, were out of touch with the science and the intellectual thoughts of their days and were not ready to defend Judaism and couldn't really give up a good defense. That's why it spread. But what turned the tide? Remember, I had a session on Saadia Gaon, the head of the academies, Saadia al-Fayumi. He was the first critical thinker among the rabbinites to give an intellectual defense of the Jewish tradition against the Karaites, against going back to trying to find the literal definition or application of the Bible to our lives, but rely on tradition as well as reason. And he used scientific arguments, philosophical arguments, and he turned the tide, and the rabbinic tradition then continued to grow and develop and draw Jews back into the ranks. Now, what happens is the Karaites, though, now are running as their own community, separate from the rabbinic Judaism. The Muslim world recognizes them as a separate legal entity, right? In the Muslim world, you don't just have a nation state, right? You have your tribal systems. And so your religious communities will be operated on this also. Your Christian groups will be this category. Your Jews will be this category. Now they operate as separate category for the Karaites. They're among the protected peoples, but they're run separately from Jews. So they have their own, and they make their way in Muslim society very well. Doctors, clerks, tax collectors in the Egyptian court, active in Jewish philosophy also. And the barrier is not complete between the two. And so historian Salo with my Baron suggests that one time they reached to as much as 40% of world Jewry, right? Could have been the dominant part of world Jewry, but shrunk, it did. Well, it did manage to spread even to Eastern Europe, and they were distinct from the rest of the Jewish community. Lithuania, Poland, Galicia. The most famous area is Crimea, and I'll show you some of that. The Crimea became maybe their best known location in Europe. Of course, Egypt, the other large location. So here I have a picture of a synagogue in Crimea. The word they use is kenesa, kenes, a gathering. What we use in Hebrew as Knesset, an assembly, Bet Knesset, they use the word Knessa. The same theme, the same idea, that people come together in the community. Notice I'm putting all these licenses. I've been warned that I have to be very careful what I put, because everybody, they're bottom feeder organizations looking to blackmail people who post pictures from other sources. So I'm being very careful. Here's a beautiful Knesset in Upatoria, also in the Crimea. A lovely structure that you can see the columns and the lovely gateway. The Crimea is one of the areas, one of their key centers. And coming into modern times, they were very successful there. They had settled down, were very well to do. And come the 1800s, the Russian authorities who had taken over the Ukraine from Poland, trying to figure out what to do with the Jews, because in Russia proper, there weren't Jews. Well, they see these Karaite Jews, and there are all sorts of oppressive laws against Jews. Well, the governor of that region told them that although they, like the Karaites, did not accept the Talmud, and they believed that the Talmud was what kept the Jews from Christianity. Well, they were still Jews in response for the crucifixion of Jesus, and therefore subject to the laws against Jews, right? The devil's people. Oh, so the leaders did what any good leader would do to protect his people. Said, well, we're not them. We were in Crimea before Jesus. And so one of the great figures, charismatic figures of the Karaite community in the 1800s, Abram Firkovich, made the case to the Russian authorities that Karaites were descendants of the northern kingdom of Israel. They were in exile long before Jesus. Therefore, they are not damned by the book of John that says, his blood be upon us and on our children. Well, Jews, yes, they are damned, but Karaites are before Jews. They did not kill Jesus. They don't have the guilt of Jesus' blood. Therefore, they can be allowed all the benefits of the Russian Empire. But on their own, among themselves, the Hachamim, they use the term Hachamim, they taught their people, yeah, we're really still part of the Jewish people. Prayers in Hebrew, we have our descendants, we know whose family, and we always consider ourselves Jews, right? So it was a ruse put upon the Russians in order to get ahead. I'll show you where that ruse comes again in modern times. Let's go ahead then. Well, here is the Tsar, Nicholas II, very happy about the Crimean Karaites not being Jews, and he comes to pay a royal visit to this synagogue. Okay, I mentioned also Egypt. Egypt, there's a large settlement of Jews in Egypt. They were very well integrated in Egyptian society. And they were, again, as was happening among standard Jews, rabbinic Jews, the inroads of modernity. So you have progressives and traditionalists. The progressives, more liberal interpretation of halakha, greater identification with the rabbis, rabbinic Jews, and the traditionalists led by Chacham Babovich, greater separation and separation from Zionism. Right? They became well identified with Zionism. They were expelled from Egypt under Nasser. He didn't care if you were a Rabbinite Jew or a Karaite Jew, you're out. They're all expelled. And my sister-in-law is one of those who was expelled, her family. It was not, that was done in 1960, I think, or 61. So that community settled mostly in Beersheba and other places in Israel. They had been involved on behalf of Israel against the Egyptian regime. There was a famous affair called the Lavona Affair, and one of the Karaites was one of the key people in there, and I think he was caught. He's considered a hero for Israel, just like Eli Cohen was in Syria. Well, today, this not a great number. They number in the few tens of thousands. There are 1,500 in the United States. I'll show you the synagogue. Maybe 80 left in Turkey. 30,000 in Israel. That's the largest gathering. Ramla, Ashdod, Beersheba. Then another 2,000 in the Ukraine, right? In the Crimea in particular. A few in Lithuania, a few in Russia. Poland, 43 left in Poland. Well, in California, it's here in California, Congregation B'nai Yisrael in Daly City. It's the only Karaite city in the United States with a permanent facility. There's another community in another part, but they don't have a full facility. And they actually had their own Karaite Jewish university. They had converts studying Judaism and converted into Karaite Judaism. The first case in 542 years, because Karaites originally did not accept the idea of conversion. Right? This is the first case. Well, here is the synagogue, an old Karaite synagogue in Jerusalem. And as you look at it, you would not figure anything different from Karaite synagogue and our synagogues. Walk in, Aron Kodesh, the Bima, in the center. Wouldn't notice anything particularly different at this. Well, let's see, some of the key principles. All right. As I said, they felt that rabbinic edicts sometimes contradict what was in the written Torah. They would go back, revise it, create their own halacha. They call it Sevel HaYerusha, the burden of inheritance. The Karaite leaders called Chacham, which is, rather than rabbi, which is also standard title among Sephardic rabbis. In fact, my rabbinic degree also says Rabbi Yitkari veChacham Yitkari, both rabbi and Chacham, cover Ashkenazic and Sephardic, right? So, but they do use the term rabbi now as well. They share. In many ways, they share much more than they don't share. Well, you have the Shabbat, you have the synagogue. Interestingly enough, on Shabbat, for a Jew, marital relations between a husband and wife is a blessed event. For the Karaites, it's considered work. So you don't do it. Okay, to each his own cup of tea. Their prayer books are biblical passages, quotations, Psalms, and other sources. They didn't write their own prayers like the rabbis. They don't have the Amida as we have it, right? That's a break. They often bow completely during the prayers. I'll show you the pictures, right? Which was actually an old rabbinic custom before it was eliminated. We only have it on Yom Kippur, and they keep it during the regular services. Also, they don't have candle lighting because, like the Sadducees before them, they took literally the idea that fire shall not be burnt. To mean it shall not be burnt at all. So it shall not be not lighted on and not leave it on, right? So they're in the dark, and you don't warm the food. Same thing. Again, this is going back Sadducee practice. They do now accept use of battery-powered equipment because nobody's working to make the electricity for you on the battery, so they will allow that. Shavuot, as I said, they count Shavuot like the Sadducees from the Shabbat of Pesach. The rabbis count from the second day, from the day after the first festival, which is a Shabbat. Very big difference, because then we have it consistent on the calendar, theirs goes back and forth. Tzitzit, the talit. They carry talit similar to what we have, but they said that the blue could be made from any color. Rabbinic tradition is only from a specific dye from a specific animal. So the tying is also distinct. So they do have blue on the tzitzit al-shela. They do not have tefillin, as they interpret it as metaphorical. That's not authentic to the Bible. Although we know from the Dead Sea Scrolls that tefillin is very old. They didn't accept it. Like Samaritans don't have it. Also, the mezuzah, though, also. The Samaritans have mezuzah as an inscription on the door. The Karaites said, no, it's only metaphorical, right? No mezuzah. Lulav and esrog. We shake it. They say it's part of the roof. And I think the Samaritans do the same thing. It's part of the roof. And they have a different variety of fruits. So are they going to be considered Jews or not? Here's a great question. I said, you saw when they had the opportunity to get civil rights in Russia, they rushed to say we're not Jews. What happened in the Holocaust? Life, now it's a life and death issue. So in 1934, already in 1934, the heads of the Karaite community in Berlin asked the Nazis to exempt Karaites from anti-Semitic regulations based on their legal status as Russians in Russia. So you were in Germany, you may have been a Karaite. The laws are being imposed. You say, no, I'm a Karaite. So I'm really part of the Russians, because Russia accepted us as Russians. So the Germans investigated and decided that from the standpoint of German law, Karaites are not Jews. And they wrote specifically, Reichsstelle für Sippenforschung. Karaites should not be considered Jewish religious community. And here, Obergruppenführer Gottlob Berger wrote in 1944, during the midst of the Holocaust, their Mosaic religion is unwelcome, right? They hate the Bible, they hate Christianity also, we know that. But on grounds of race, language, and religious dogma, right? We're still not considering them Jews. Discrimination against Karaites is unacceptable because of their racial kinsmen, the Tatars of Crimea. They are Crimean Tatars, an Asian, Turkish, Mongolian people. However, so as not to infringe the unified anti-Jewish orientation of nations led by Germans, suggested this small group be given an opportunity of a separate existence, like labor battalions. Right? So they would, because we're really not sure, we won't kill them. We're not going to shoot them down. We'll separate them because it's going to be confusing to everybody. How can you have Jews who are not Jews? And what's interestingly enough was that the Ashkenazic rabbis in Crimea agreed with them and told the Germans the Karaites are not Jews. And why? Why did they do that? Because they knew they could spare the Karaites. They couldn't spare themselves, but they spared the Karaites. Very interesting decision. And the Karaites in turn risked their lives to hide Jews. And they would pretend that Jews were Karaites among them. All right, watch this, interesting. So are they Jews or not? Now, according to sources, Nazi racial theory said the Karaites are actually Crimean Goths. The Goths are an early Germanic people who had just made their way into Crimea and just looked like Tatars and had their own distinct form of Judaism. As long as they weren't, if they weren't racially Jews, they could survive. Right? That was the uniqueness of Nazi anti-Semitism. We don't care about the belief. It's the race. So if you're a Jew who was Christian, baptized, doesn't matter, you're dead. If you're a Karaite and you have Judaism, but your DNA, your blood is not Jews, you're okay. So are they Jews or not? Are they historically Jews? Because there were theories that maybe the Karaites, especially of the Crimea, are maybe descendants of the Khazars, the original those Jews, the Jewish kingdom in the south of the Ukraine, or that they really are separate from others, that really are Tatar peoples because they dress like Tatars, you see, they speak like Tatars. But they do DNA studies, both Y, which is the father, mitochondrial DNA from the mother. They are just as close to us as Ashkenazic and Sephardic and all the other Mizrahi Jews, and have no heritage with the Turkic peoples, seeking peoples of the regions. In other words, they're Jews. They separated themselves politically and in practice and institutions, but we're the same people. And generally, rabbinic tradition was that the Karaites were considered Jews, but since they separated from the rabbis on observance, when it came to the issue of divorce, they were not following the rabbinic doctrines on divorce. Therefore, when somebody remarried, or a woman in particular, remarried after a divorce, we don't know what that divorce document was. So that child out of that relationship may be an adulterated, a mamzer. And as a mamzer, you don't marry a mamzer. So they put them all in the presumption of mamzer, of bastards. And that was the way they separated them from the rabbinic community. It was a control. It's control. What has happened in modern times is the rabbinic authorities have decided that that's no longer in effect, that they are not following our practices in the divorce, but that their intention is a divorce, and therefore those children are not to be considered mamzerim. 1971, Avad Yosef, Rabbi Avad Yosef, chief rabbi of the Sephardim, said that the Egyptian Karaites in particular are Jews. They can marry with rabbinic Jews. There should be no barrier. Right? So that puts them in the Jewish camp, in their own policies and traditions, but in the Jewish camp. Well, here, this is from Times of Israel, a little article about the Karaites, 40,000 followers, but I wanted primarily with this picture, and I'm very careful to put it in its context so nobody can say it's just lifted, it's here. Notice, here's a service, Karaite service, and if you'll see, they are kneeling, right? That certainly looks like a Muslim posture, but it is a rabbinic practice which was abandoned because the rabbis wanted to distinguish Jews maybe from Christians of their day and Muslims, and restricted it only to Yom Kippur. Also, the kippah, that is definitely a rabbinite Jewish custom late in its origin, long after the split. The talit looks like the exact same talit. They bought it from the same talis maker. But I want you to look here. I have this arrow going over here. If you look very closely, the tzitzit, you can see here, has a blue thread, which is actually getting popular again in some Hasidic circles, blue thread. Right? So you see this transition. Then I have a chief rabbi, and they use the term rabbi rather than chacham now. And one more picture, and you can see here, he's barefoot. Right? Shoes are taken off. Well, what does the Kohen do when he goes up for the Duchanan? Takes off his shoes, he's barefoot. What do Muslims do when they enter a mosque? Take off their shoes, they're barefoot. Right? By the way, in the Middle East, many people take off their shoes when they walk into the house. In Canada, my relatives take off their shoes when they walk in the house because there's snow and mud. Right? A lot of communities remove the shoes. Well, they don't. Right? So, no Hanukkah, by the way. No separation of meat and milk. They can have their cheeseburgers. Okay. Yeah. This is their current, the head or rabbi of this association of rabbis. You can see the tzitzit, by the way, the talit with the blue thread behind it. But the cloth is the same talis manufacturer. It's Zion Talis, I guess that's the company that makes them, the most popular one. And Israeli from Or Yahud, served in the Israeli Air Force, studied Ben Gurion University, he's doing his doctorate in the origins of the Karaites. Okay, so now I'm going to show us some other visuals. I'm going to shrink this down a little bit of some visuals. And let me get this. Let's see if I can get this to work right. Okay, let's see. Did I get it here? So we can see them here. This is in San Francisco, Daly City. This is their synagogue today. Some sitting in chairs, some kneeling. And next one. Go ahead. Where are you? I get it to speed up a little bit. There we go. Karaite women from the Crimea. You can see the Tatar headdress. Right? Tatars being these people that are Turkic-speaking people that spread from Ukraine into Central Asia. Right? Similar dress, but historically the Jews. Right? Let's go ahead. Some costumes. The Internet Encyclopedia of Ukraine here. Tatar traditional male and female costume worn by the Karaite Jews. Let me see if I can get some more. There we go. This is an interesting, it's a blog writer who writes about the history of Ukraine and peoples of the Ukraine. Put this up as a family, as a Karaite family. Somehow, I'm not sure if that is, only because this is more Arabic headdress. Maybe they're from Egypt, that could be. That might be possible rather than the Crimea. But then he talks about the Karaites of Crimea and their origins as the people of, right, the Tatar peoples and the distinguished features. And then the follow-up article, though, is about another group, which are the Jews, the rabbinic Jews of Crimea, who are called Krimchak. Right, so you have Crimean Jews and you have Krimchaks. The Krimchaks are straight traditional rabbinic Jews, and they both go back way back. The writer of this blog is talking about the antiquity of both of these groups in the Crimea, way far back. He calls them the indigenous peoples of Crimea, actually, because that's how far back he thinks they go. So Krimchaks and Crimean Karaites. Okay, and despite the split, right, there's a lot of similarity. Let's see here. Okay, this, if anybody wants to follow up, here is a website for Karaite Jews of America. Website, and they're very beautiful things, and I've picked up things from their website. You can read this, karaites.org, and I'm going to close out some of these so we don't have too many open tabs. That's it, and go here, and I've got some selections for us, a little bit of variety. Let me see if I get it on. A Karaite song for Shavuot. Erog b'chol livi, I shall bring up with all my heart this praise of God, and we'll enjoy it. Chazan Moses ben Aaron.
ארוג בכל ליבי לפני אדון עוזי יום החמישים זה ספר קדושתי ארוג בכל ליבי לפני אדון עוזי יום החמישים זה ספר קדושתי בוחן לבבותיהו מרום ושוכן עד ובעד כבוד תורה בחר איומתי רעם וקול שופר שמעו קהילת אל עת קיבלו הברית מעוז קהילתי ארוג בכל ליבי לפני אדון עוזי יום החמישים זה ספר קדושתי עודו מאוד נורא לא יכלו לסבול עמדו חרדים גם נעו למשרתי.
Okay, now, so this one is a Shavuot melody composed by Rabbi Avram ben Aaron, Chazan of the community of Troki. I think that's in the Balkans, I'm not sure. Not in Crimea itself, I think. If I'm embarrassed myself, I don't know everything. Now we're going to hear the same thing. Notice that the Hebrew, if I were reading the Hebrew's Hebrew, I would say, yeah, this is a typical Hebrew Middle Ages poetic style. I wouldn't notice anything that would be Karaite, particularly in the Hebrew. Now, go ahead to the same version, sung to what would be a typical Sephardic tune, Hamavdu ben Kodesh, the Havdalah song. It's a popular Israeli song. Livvod Hendat Livi.
50 זה ספר קדושתי. בוחן לבבות הוא מרום ושוכן עד ובעד כבוד תורה בחר איומתי. יום ה50 זה ספר קדושתי.
Okay, so if you're familiar, that's Lichvodchem dat levavi, Eliyahu Hanavi. That's the song. It's a Sephardic melody. It's very popular in Israel. They're one of us. They pick up from us. We pick up. We may have picked up from them. All right. As for the Nazis, they're not. For the Russians, they're not. But that's to save lives. They give. But in Israel, they're fighting. They're in the Israeli army, the military. As I say, one of the great spies for Israel was a Karaite Jew. Another example here, more modern, right? Incorporation of modern music into a Shabbat song. Sharecha by Ibn Gvirol, right? Ibn Gvirol, rabbinic philosopher, did not care for the Karaites, but they liked his writings, so they took him up. So they're going on, it goes on, they add verses to it. Could have been sung in a pub in Liverpool, right? The Beatles wrote that melody. Okay, very eclectic, right? It's just the ways we do, choose eclectic services and music. And one more selection, we'll call it a rap, which is a poem, Kishmer Shabbat. It is one very popular among Sephardic Jews, and they have incorporated into their service also. And the melody, an Israeli melody, Al Havatecha. Again, by Ibn Ezra. Right? And they changed the text.
חפצו חפץ לעשות דרכים, גם מלדבר בו דברי צרכים, דברי סחורה או דברי מלכים, אהגה בתורת אל ותחכמני אותי לעולם מעט בינו וביני, תהיה שמירה שבת אל ישמרני.
בו אמצא תמיד נופש לנפשי, הנה לדור ראשון נתן קדושי, מופת בית לחם משנה בשישי, ככה בכל שישי יכפיל מזוני אותי
לעולם מעט בינו וביני, כי יש שמירה שבת אל ישמרני. רשום בדף.
Okay, so I'll give you a flavor of some of the music, right? It's standard Israeli contemporary Mizrahi melodies that they would have picked up because it's the Rabbinites and the Karaites living side by side, sharing where they did and disagreeing where they did. What will be in the future? We don't know. There are only, as the article says, only 40,000 in the world today. Possibly they will blend in, emerge with the mainstream of the Jewish community. But then we have our own splits that are bigger splits today between religious and secular, and between Reform and the conservative and Orthodox and Hasidic, and the Hasidic that don't speak to other Hasidic, who don't speak to the Sephardic Orthodox, who don't speak to the Sephardic Ultra. Yeah, we got enough splits anyway, so that their split with us is a very small split. So,
So
go ahead.
the question is how Israel deal with so many traditions, which in some sense they're close, but they are not. So how do they deal with that? Because it's a difficult issue to accept all of them.
All right. So what if they live in Israel as Israeli citizens? The state of Israel had no problem considering them citizens of Israel. And what's happened lately in the last years, I mentioned Rabbi Avad Yosef, and I think increasingly so, that whatever were the barriers to marrying Jews, because historically they're Jews, they're just not following the rabbinic tradition. So the barriers were those of the question of, as I said, paternity, because we don't know their marriage traditions. They decided that, increasingly decided that's not an issue. And once you remove the barrier to marriage, then there's no difference. And, there's no functional difference. Would a rabbinic Jew daven with a Karaite congregation? He wouldn't know what's happening. Would a Karaite feel come from a rabbinic congregation? He wouldn't know, because the text, the service text itself is very, very different. But some of the traditions you can see are the same, and a lot of chants are borrowed. Quite probable that some rabbinic traditions may have actually been picked back from the Karaites. Is possible. The one thing that was controversial was this question of whether they were Jews, because they were using it to save themselves from the Russian government and later from the Nazis. But to be frank, what we do to save our necks is something that we can forgive. Right? and not hold against them. By the way, there's a whole theory that says that all of us Ashkenazic Jews are not really Jews to begin with. Anyway, we're really Crimean Tatars who just happened to take over Poland and East Europe. Okay, that's for the Ashkenazic Jews. It's been knocked down. Linguistic studies show it's impossible, and the DNA studies show it's impossible. But people like Arthur Kessler like to do it because he thought that way he would convince anti-Semites not to hurt us Jews because we're not really Jews. Everybody come up with an explanation. Okay. All right. So next week we'll go back to our theme of great Jewish thinkers. I'm going to go into the modern period. And the character I want to pick up on is Moses Mendelssohn, the Hunchback of Dessau, and how a very disshaped Jew turned Europe upside down, especially important for the Jews of Europe. That was what opened the doors. So that's going to be my topic for the next Shabbat. Okay, and so I wish everybody Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. We'll take it from there.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Shalom, everybody. No. Just Shabbat.
Shabbat Shalom.
Okay.
Shabbat shalom.
Yeah, remember Wednesday. If you didn't get an email, send me a note, remind me, I'll send you the connection. Okay. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Rob.